Well, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Maturing the Sons of God. I am your host, Apostle Michael Fram, with Prophetic Destiny Ministries International in Sayreville, New Jersey. And we come to you every Wednesday, broadcasting on the Kingdom First TV network at 5:30 p.m. on the East Coast and 2:30 p.m. on the West Coast. And of course, Kingdom First TV is sponsored by the Love and Unity Movement. For more information, you can check us out on the website at love-unity.org. love-unity.org. We are in a series of lessons that we are calling Knowing What You Believe and Why. Knowing what you believe and why. And the first several lessons we talked about knowing what you believe and why about the ascension gifts. And then we went into knowing what you believe and why about healing. And right now we are in what we call knowing what you believe and why about the prophetic. Knowing what you believe and why about the prophetic. And so last week where we left off, we were in the middle of talking about levels of prophetic gifting. We started with the levels of prophetic gifting, where everybody starts the same at the simple gift of prophecy, or at what Graham Cook called the shallow end of basic prophecy. That's the starting level, which is immature and weak prophetic. And then we progressed a little bit. And we went into level 2 of the prophetic, which is what we call some prophetic gifting. And that's when you're moving into a little bit more mature or an average prophetic. And then you go into level 3, and level 3 is what we consider prophetic ministry. Prophetic ministry. And this is still in more mature, but still an average prophetic. You don't get into a strong prophetic and a well-developed prophetic gift until one becomes in the ascension gift or the office or the ministry gift or the fivefold ministry gift of the prophet. And so we have the simple gift of prophecy or shallow basic prophecy. Then we have some prophetic gifting. Then we have the prophetic ministry. And then we have the office of the prophet. So last week when we ended, or the last time we were live, last week I was out on the road ministering and didn't do a live broadcast. But the last time we were live, which was 2 weeks ago, we were talking in level 3, which is the prophetic ministry. And we were saying that prophetic ministry is a person that probably is not called to the office of the prophet, but somebody that maybe is another fivefold ministry gift that believes in apostles and prophets and has exhibited consistent operation and manifestation of the vocal gifts of the Spirit and the revelation gifts of the Spirit. And when we had gone out and off the air 2 weeks ago, we were talking about hyphenated gifting. And we made mention of the fact, if you've ever studied Dr. Bill Hammond's books or Bishop Bill Hammond's books or Dr. C. Peter Wagner's books, they both used a term in their writings that was called hyphenated gifting. And so hyphenated gifting is where people might be like a pastor, but they might be a prophetic pastor. because even though their main function is that of pastor, they've got prophetic tendencies and they operate in prophetic gifting. And so that would be a hyphenated gift. And there would be those that might be considered as prophetic evangelists or prophetic teachers or even prophetic apostles. I know for many years, my mom, who's in heaven now, and she's looking down upon me and cheering me on from the great cloud of witnesses that's up in the sky. My mom was functioning as an apostle, but by hyphenated gifting, she was really a prophetic apostle. Now, during those years, I think most of you know that I functioned for 16 years of my life in the office of the prophet. And while I was functioning as a prophet, I would have been considered as a apostolic prophet by hyphenated gifting. That was because I had an apostolic mindset, and the apostolic grace was emerging in my life, so that even though I was functioning as a prophet, I was an apostolic prophet. And so when we begin to look at those that are in prophetic ministry, many times they are a hyphenated gifting. They might be a pastor, but because they operate in the prophetic as a pastor, we would consider them by hyphenated gift a prophetic pastor, or maybe a prophetic evangelist, or maybe a prophetic teacher, or as my mom was, a prophetic apostle. Another thing about the prophetic ministry, we would say that it may be another of the fivefold ascension gifts that operates regularly by both the revelation gifts and the inspiration gifts. Now, you know, when we study the gifts of the Spirit or the manifestations of the Spirit, there are three of those manifestations or three of those gifts that we consider revelation gifts. That is the word of knowledge, the word of wisdom, and the discerning of spirits. And then we have three that are considered the inspiration gifts or the vocal gifts, and that is prophecy, diverse kinds of tongues, and the interpretation of tongues. So other fivefold or ascension gift ministries that operate consistently in the revelation gifts and the inspiration gifts might be considered in prophetic ministry, even though their predominant calling may be pastor, may be evangelist, may be teacher, or something like that. Then we might consider also somebody in level 3 or in prophetic ministry where that person may be called to the office of the prophet and may be developing into that. And there was an old expression that went about several years ago that was called prophet in training. There are people that are called to be something, but they're not fully developed in it yet and aren't ready to step into the fullness of the operation of it. We know from the Old Testament story of Elijah and Elisha that Elijah threw his mantle over Elisha's shoulders, and he was called to be the prophet in Elijah's place, or as the King James Bible puts it, in your stead. And so we can look at that and know that Elisha had the call to be a prophet, but he went through about anywheres, depending on the theologian that you believe, anywheres from 7 or 8 years to possibly being 12 or 13 years in an apprenticeship program in a protege system, being one that was trained to be a prophet by serving a prophet. So he had the call to be, but wasn't ready to be commissioned to be. And sometimes there are people that are in prophetic ministry that have the call of prophet, but they're not yet ready to be commissioned as a prophet. We know from looking at the story of Elijah and Elisha that when the mantle was thrown, that was the call. But when Elijah was taken up from him and the mantle fell, and Elisha then picked up the mantle, that was the commission. And that was when Elisha was ready to walk in the fullness of the call that he had received when the mantle was thrown. So during that process where he was an apprentice, when he served Elijah, and you know that the sons of the prophets were watching in those days, and when it came time for them to be separated, the sons of the prophets said to him, "Don't you know your master's going to be taken from you today?" And he said, "Yeah, I know. Shut up. Hold your peace." He knew that his master was going to be taken from him. But when his master was taken from him and the mantle fell, that's when Elisha picked up that mantle. And we know that when that mantle fell and Elisha picked it up, we know that he went and he struck the waters again. And he said, "Where is the Lord God of Elijah?" And the sons of the prophets that were watching, they took note of the fact that Elisha now had Elijah's mantle. And he saw Elisha strike the waters, and he saw the waters separate, even as they had when Elijah and Elisha approached that river. And Elijah struck the waters, and they separated, and the two crossed over on dry ground. Then the sons of the prophets, now their declaration changed. And it changed from, "Don't you know that your master is going to be taken from you?" to now the declaration was, "Surely the mantle of Elijah is resting on Elisha." So we know that there was a difference between the call to be a prophet and the commission to step in the fullness of that. And there used to be an expression years ago that was called being in the pit, which is prophet in training. And that analogy is taken from Joseph. When Joseph was sold into slavery, he was in the pit. And a prophet in training is a pit. And a prophet in training is where God works out of you all the things that are in you that are unlike God. That's where God works on your character. That's where God develops you and makes you ready to be able to walk in the fullness of that call. And so sometimes those that would be considered in prophetic ministry might be those that are in the pit, those that are prophets in training, those that are called to be prophets, but aren't ready yet to manifest the fullness of that call because they're still in development. And this is something that we can't overlook. And a lot of folks today, they want to shortcut the process of God. And you can't do it. You can't shortcut the process of God. We've got to understand there's a difference between calling and commissioning. And I don't care what the function is. I don't care if it's prophet. I don't care if it's evangelist. I don't care if it's pastor, if it's teacher, or if it's apostle. You may be called to be, but not be ready to be. And I think we've got a lot of folks that have run off with the fact that they've been called. One of the things that I hear constantly is, I'm called. I'm called. I have the call of God on my life. And my response is usually, congratulations. Because the reality of the situation is this: the Bible says that many are called and few are chosen. And the difference between the called and the commission, the difference between those that are called and those that are chosen, is the ones that get chosen are the ones that are willing to go through the process of development. And that process is really an apprenticeship process. You know, we don't really understand apprenticeship today. I'm beginning to get a better understanding of apprenticeship because my son, who's almost 22 years of age, he's 21, he'll be 22 in a couple of months. My son works in the trades, and he is a first-year apprentice in the local plumbers and pipe fitters union. Do you know that in that union, he has to go through first-year apprentice, second-year apprentice, third-year apprentice, fourth-year apprentice, fifth-year apprentice, and after he's been an apprentice for 5 years, and he goes through each stage and each step, then eventually, after 5 years of apprenticeship, then he becomes what's known as a journeyman. In the trades, we understand that. We see that in the carpenter trade. We see it in the plumbing trade. We see it in the electrician trade. We see it in all forms of construction. We see it in welding. We see it in mason work. We see it in all kinds of trades, apprenticeship. And it's amazing to me how we think in ministry functions we don't have to go through apprenticeship. Now, just because my son is a first-year apprentice doesn't mean after his 1 year of apprenticeship, he's a journeyman plumber and pipe fitter. He's not. He's first year. And once some point here in July is when he's going to have to get tested and pass a test, and then he'll become a second-year apprentice. Now, when he goes from first-year apprentice to second-year apprentice, he gets more responsibility. He's qualified to do different tasks that he's doing now as a first-year apprentice. And as a second-year apprentice, because he's more developed, he actually gets a pay raise. When he becomes a third-year apprentice, again, qualified for other things and another pay raise. As a fourth-year apprentice, the same thing again. And a fifth-year apprentice, same thing again. And after the 5 years of apprenticeship, then he actually moves into the place where he's considered a journeyman, and he's fully qualified for all of the projects that he might face on a construction site as a plumber and a pipe fitter. You know, you don't get to be a foreman on the job until you're an experienced journeyman plumber and pipe fitter. They don't make the first year apprentice the foreman. And so it is in developing in levels of the prophetic. We got folks that begin to prophesy and think they're prophets. No, you're basically learning. You can be having some prophetic gifting. You can be one that has a prophetic ministry, but you're still a prophet in training. You are in an apprenticeship and you are learning how to become a prophet. And one of the best ways to learn is to be around other seasoned prophets and people of mature prophetic gifting. I'm watching my son going through his apprenticeship as a plumber and pipe fitter, and he learns a lot by on-the-job training. And part of it is also classroom training. And he's learning things in the classroom, but then he's learning things on the job. And then there are times for extra credit. He's been going down to the union hall and he's been taking extra classes and learning about brazing and welding to get better at those particular tasks, which are things that he has to know and he's got to be able to do. And I'm amazed that some people say, well, I'm called. I've already learned how to prophesy. But you've never been an apprentice. You've never been under a master prophet or a prophetic father or a seasoned ministry voice. And because you've got prophetic gifting, or maybe you're in prophetic ministry, you think you're ready to be a prophet. No, you're learning. You're in apprenticeship. And apprenticeship is important. And we've got to realize that many are called, but few are chosen. And the reason that few are chosen is most don't want to wait to go through the process. They don't want to be an apprentice. Now, when my son went into this particular trade as plumber and pipe fitter, one of the things that he was told, your first year, you can expect to make X. Your second year, you can expect to make X. Your third year, this. Your fourth year, this. By the time you get to your fifth year, as you get these raises, you can expect to make this. Now, you don't make that the first year. You get to that place after you've been through all 5 levels of apprenticeship, and now you're a journeyman. Now you're making 6 figures. You're not making that as a first year or a second year or a third year apprentice. And yet we've got people that want to go from having prophetic gifting to being a prophet. And you haven't been through the stages of development. We need folks to move through all of the stages and move through all of the training. And part of that is OJT, on the job training. And one of the best ways to develop your prophetic gifting is to be around a seasoned prophet. One of the greatest spiritual laws that I've discovered is that mantles are passed by relationship and proximity. Now, you can have the call to be a prophet, but if you're not serving under a seasoned prophet where that mantle will rub off on you. You know, the thing about the word anoint, in the Hebrew, that word anoint means to rub. And you need some things to rub off on you. They come through relationship and proximity. There are a lot of things that I got in my life because I was under the tutelage of my father. Apostle Michael Fram poured into my life. And I've served and been under some great men of God, and have had some great men of God pour into me. And things come by relationship and by proximity. But we think in today's day and age, I can be called to be a prophet, and I can begin to prophesy. And after I begin to prophesy, now I'm ready to be a prophet. Nothing could be further from the truth. And we've got to stop saying, well, I've learned how to prophesy. Now I can just go and function as a prophet. No, you can't. You haven't served as an apprentice yet. You haven't been under tutelage yet. You haven't been trained yet. You haven't been developed yet. And it's really important that we quit trying to short circuit the process. And I want to see people, I'm not trying to keep people back. I'm trying to raise people up. Part of the job of the fivefold ministry is to develop people for what they are called to do. I like to say our job is to discover what people's gifts are, discover them, develop them, and then ultimately deploy them where we release them into the fullness of what they are called to do. That is our job. So I'm constantly looking for diamonds in the rough. I'm looking for people that have grace on their life, people that have gifting on their life. And then I look to pour into those that are diamonds in the rough. My dad one time made a statement in one of his messages. He said, you're always looking for learners that will be leaders. And that's true if you're an apostle or if you're a prophet. You're looking for learners that will be leaders. You're looking for those that exhibit grace and exhibit gifting that you can pour into so that they can be developed to the place where they end up like Elisha after the mantle fell from Elijah. And then everybody will say, surely the spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha. I'm tired of seeing people that try to jump too soon and they become an accident going somewhere to happen. No, let's go through all the stages of development. So yes, we start at the shallow end of basic prophecy. Yes, we move into having prophetic gifting. Then we move into prophetic ministry. Then after we are in prophetic ministry, then we can become ready to move into the office of the prophet. But not until. I have a spiritual daughter that I commissioned as a prophet. And the first time I met her, I saw the prophetic grace on her life. And the Lord told me, you can help her if she will let you. And as we were developing our relationship, she would say, well, where am I? And I would say, you're at level 1. Well, you're at level 2. Well, you're at level 3. And then she said to me, well, what do I got to do to get to level 4? And it was like, one thing you lack. You've got to do this. Thank God she listened to everything that I said. And eventually she got to the place that she was ready to be commissioned as a prophet. And it was a joy for me to commission her as a prophet. Our goal is not to keep people back, but to develop them into the fullness of what they are called to do. Well, my time is done for today. I don't know where 29 and a half minutes went, but they did. Next week, we're going to go into level 4. We're going to go into the office of the prophet, and we'll begin to talk about that. Ladies and gentlemen, if you got something out of this broadcast today, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor, hit the share button, and share this broadcast with somebody else. If you got something out of it, chances are they will too. Until next week, this is Apostle Michael reminding you that God loves you and I love you. And there ain't nothing that you can do about it. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for watching Kingdom First TV, your station